Does organized crime still exist in the city of Boston in 2024? And if so, how active are they? What's up, everybody? Welcome back. So, back when I used to regularly make content about the Boston mob, people were always asking me to make videos about the current state of affairs in the city. People in the comments would say things like they don't even exist anymore, but that's not an entirely true statement. Now, as far as the Irish mob goes, that was always more of a media creation, anyways. Winter Hill was never exclusively Irish, and Whitey really only ever ran Southie. He didn't have the whole city sewn up like a lot of people used to say. That's more of like a Mother Goose fairy tale. He ran the Southie rackets and he extorted unprotected bookies and dealers, what I call low-hanging fruit. Now, as for the Italian Cosa Nostra, they still exist in Boston, just to a much smaller extent. Back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the mob ran the city. That's not the truth anymore. But to say they don't exist isn't entirely true either. They look much different. A lot of their traditional rackets have become legalized, so they've had to adapt and change with the times, but they still exist. Before I get into the video, that just brings to mind, I have this dream of if Jerry Angulo and Larry Bayonne could just be alive for one day and they could be inside the old doghouse and there could be an FBI bug from like before when they had bugged the doghouse and they could have them recorded and they could know what the federal government has done by legalizing sports betting. You can download an app on your phone. Like right before I started recording this, it was America's #1 sports book, FanDuel. You can like they're using organized crime terminology, sports books. That's what a bookie used to keep, was a sports book to keep a ledger of all his bets. And it's like their terminology they're using in advertisements, and it's an app you can download on your phone. And like some of these apps, some of these sports betting apps, it's like the first you download this app today, and we'll give you like your first $200 bet, like your first bets for free. So not only when they were alive, they saw the government legalize the numbers racket and turn it into the lottery. So instead of my yaya handing a piece of paper and a dollar bill to a numbers runner and Lynn every day, she'd go down to the store and buy a lottery ticket. So they saw that happen in their lifetime. But since they've passed, there's been an Encore casino built in Everett that you can see right from the city. They could sit in the North End, watching everybody going to Encore, and now people can download an app on their phone and place bets after they've arrested those guys so many times, disrupted their businesses, shook them down, all this stuff. And now the government has legalized it and made it so easy for people. So my dream would be just if those guys were alive for one day and there was a bug recording the conversations that the two of them would have, just to listen to the profanity and the names that they would call the federal government and all the people that are involved. Like that would just be, I can't even imagine. It would be priceless. Can you imagine that? That would be absolutely hilarious. But anyways, back to reality. The federal government is terrified of the Italian Cosa Nostra. The amount of power and influence they had in the second half of the 20th century is unparalleled. The FBI has always kept them public enemy #1, even when that is no longer really the case. Not only did Cosa Nostra control the criminal underworld, they had infiltrated legitimate industries and labor unions. They controlled trucking and thus the movement of all goods through the infiltration of the Teamsters Union. Construction, waste removal, service industries, you name it. The mob also corrupted countless politicians, judges, district attorneys, law enforcement agents at the local, state, and federal level. It's hard to imagine today with the overwhelming strength of the federal government, but for a time in the 20th century, the mob's power rivaled that of the U.S. government. Through RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act in 1970, the federal government has consistently gone after the LCN to try to dismantle and destroy them. Even today, when the mob clearly poses much less of a threat to our society's overall well-being, especially compared to many other criminal organizations operating currently, The federal government still finds it necessary to spend taxpayers' dollars and their resources into investigating and surveilling various LCN figures in Boston and beyond. In my personal opinion, they bully and intimidate people they don't like or have scores to settle with. This happens at the state level as well. Look at Vincent Ferrara, for example. Just in 2022, the state of Massachusetts seized $268,000 from his personal bank account. He had to hire lawyers and sue the district attorney, who at the time was Maura Healey, our now governor, to get his money back. He had to spend more money to try to get his original money back. He's my mother's age, in his mid 70s. He's retired from the life and has been home since 2005. He was wrongfully convicted for the death of Jimmy Lamole. It was part of a bigger case connected to the recorded induction ceremony that took place in Medford, Mass. in 1989. Federal Judge Mark Wolf began looking back into his case when he began to understand the level of corruption that existed in the Boston FBI office in that time period. I meant to say Maura Healey was the Attorney General of Massachusetts before she became the governor of the fine Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She was the Attorney General, not the District Attorney. Now, if I didn't correct myself, people are going to be in the comments saying, she wasn't the District Attorney, she was the Attorney General. So, make a long story short, a confidential informant, Walter Jordan, told the FBI that Vincent Farrar ordered he and Patsy Barone to take out their friend Jimmy Lamole in 1985. Jordan later retracted his statement and told his FBI handler that this really wasn't true, but they said what the heck, and they kept forward with the prosecution anyways. It was tied into the big case that brought the remaining leaders of the Boston LCN down in 1989, the debacle that has later become known the Medford induction ceremony. Judge Mark Wolf would later start looking into all these old cases when he began to realize just how corrupt the FBI Boston office was. When it came to the Italian Ace LCN, they had basically thrown the rulebook out the window. By the time Ferrara was released, he had already served 16 years in prison, missing a lot of his kids' formative years. I made a few videos about this back in September, and honestly, this is a big reason of why I've gotten away from making this type of content. If I'm relying on court transcripts and FBI reports for my research, then I have to understand the majority of my info is going to be wrong, or at least very, very biased. The way that the media talks about organized crime figures is almost like they're comic book characters or something. They give them nicknames and these personas. No one in real life is calling or called Vincent Ferrara the animal. Vincent Ferrara isn't an animal. He's a gentleman and incredibly well respected in the North End still to this day. Newspaper writers like Howie Carr love to ridicule and dehumanize people like Ferrara when they write about them, but then they turn ghost white if they ever actually see the people in real life. Some of my earlier videos, I would have a bit of a mocking tone when I would discuss certain people or events, but I quickly realized I was talking about real people in real situations. People obviously don't enjoy being ridiculed, or for some, even simply being discussed. And even if I'm talking about things that happened long ago and the actual players are long gone, there are still family members of people that care very much for them that are still around. These are some of the lessons I learned since starting to upload videos on my channel. You can see how it's affected the content that I make. So being conscious of that and how the videos I make affect the people that I'm talking about or those related to them or that care about them, it definitely affects the way I make my content. If I had known the truth of what was going on, in particular with the Jimmy Lamole situation, or had spoken to people involved beforehand, I wouldn't have made those videos, or they certainly would have been much different and had much different information. And even though it was my biggest early video and it brought my subscriber count to over 1,000 and it kind of made my channel, last summer I would have not released that video about the conflict in the 1990s, or it would have been much different as well. That was so early on, even the thought of contacting someone involved didn't come to mind. It was like, who's going to talk to me? That's when I really learned you can't believe what you read, and I need to talk to people first to find out what's really going on. I would have never talked about Michael Romano Jr.'s death or contributed to the part of that conflict. I could have possibly made a separate video about his and Trooper Charbonnet's death and how tragic they were, but I wouldn't have attributed his death or the situation that transpired with his father later to anything to do with organized crime. I had no idea the personal level of that situation or the pain that that family went through. Thankfully for me, Michael Romano Sr. was gracious enough to explain the situation to me. We've talked on the phone several times since then. I had no idea the levels of irresponsibility that I was displaying by releasing videos like that. That experience had a profound impact on me, not only in how I make and release my videos, but just how I overall viewed organized crime. My perception of the media's presentation and the reality of things were very different. Then when making the Jimmy Lamole videos, plus another video about a separate topic which I released right around the same time, and I'll say that's the only video I've ever taken down due to someone giving me a hard time. Luckily, I've just made up with that person recently, but it really drove home for me that I needed to switch up my content. Now, I could have hid my identity, which honestly, just for general safety reasons, might not have been a bad idea to start off with. But I could have had my identity, my voice, whatever, like a lot of YouTubers do, and just make whatever kind of content I want, not really caring about how it affects the people I'm discussing. Honestly, I'd probably be more successful. The negative stuff, unfortunately, gets more views. What's that say about our society? But it just didn't sit right with me. That's kind of the real reason why my content has changed since the fall. With all that being said, there's very much so a Boston Cosa Nostra faction. They have to be incredibly careful how they move because of the amount of scrutiny that the federal government still puts them under. Especially lately, there's been virtually no violence associated with the Boston mob, but still because of their past, the government is terrified of them. You would think that Mexican organizations, the street crews that push their poison and indiscriminately light up street corners with innocents nearby, one would think the government would put all their resources behind stopping that, or other more violent white ethnic organizations like the Russians or Albanians, even homebred white extremist groups. I could go on and on about different groups in America that threaten our society's fabric or public safety more than the Italian Cosa Nostra. The FBI doesn't care about this though, and they'll never take their thumb off the mob. So these days, a lot of the guys have to have lower profiles. Many own legitimate businesses that don't just serve as fronts, they're in fact above board legitimate businesses, and they've had to get creative when it comes to making some illicit cash. Let's face it, the state and federal government have basically stolen all the mob's most successful rackets. They must have gotten sick of standing by and watching the mob rake in millions of illegal dollars over the years. It really is kind of crazy. The government chased these guys around for decades upon decades, arresting them and shaking them down, using the full weight of the federal government to take down their operations, then to just simply steal their hustles. It's like the government sat back, watched the mob perfect these crafts, only to steal them and profit immensely off them. It's kind of crazy message that the government is sending. It's like if the mob does gambling, alcohol, or Mary Jane, then it's wrong and illegal. But if the government is behind it, it's completely legal and morally acceptable. It's BS. Straight malarkey. That's why I said I would love to hear Angulo and Bayonne going off on those bleep bleep feds. Not only would it be absolutely hilarious, but it also is a completely legitimate gripe. The US government really pulls some stuff now, don't they? The government let the mob perfect these crafts, work out all the kinks, and then just simply step in and take over the already successful business model. They did it with the numbers racket, turning into state and national lotteries like the Powerball, where the pots have been over $1 billion in the last few years. Of course, the government gets to keep a big chunk of those ticket proceeds. Then it was the legalization of casino gambling, which started on the Indian reservations, but now instead of driving a couple hours to Mohegan Sun or Foxwood, there are casinos right in major cities like Springfield and right outside of Boston with Encore. Is it a coincidence they put casinos right by mob-controlled or former mob-controlled cities? It's a little extra slap in the face in my opinion. The two craziest things in my opinion though are the legalization of sports betting through apps that you can download onto your phone. I mean, the government is well aware how dangerous gambling is for some people. Being able to place bets right from an app on someone's phone is basically guaranteeing financial ruin for any compulsive gambler. The sports betting apps are just kind of gross in my opinion. The federal government knows how detrimental those things will be to a lot of people and their families. Bank accounts will be drained, and I'm sure some divorces will be inked as a result too. The other black market cash cow that Massachusetts has legalized and thus taken out of the mob's repertoire, or at least tried to take out of the mob's repertoire, is the Mary Jane business. The mob made lots of money in the trafficking of this item. They also used to stage elaborate deals that were nothing more than straight robberies. They never intended to sell anything. This is how the whole Jimmy Lamoli situation started. It stemmed from a rip-off deal that Jimmy was left out of and lost a big chunk of change as a result. Back in the 70s and 80s, guys were making big money off of grass. There was a very limited supply and a large demand. Quality was low and it was basically a seller's market. The government now seems to realize what is actually always known, that grass is less dangerous than alcohol or cigarettes and never should have been illegal to begin with. It was convenient legislation to keep down lower classes and certain minority groups. That's until the government realized exactly how much money they were missing out on. This, in a way, is backfiring a little for the government. Don't get me wrong, they are making a killing with the dispensaries. A lot of older people or people who simply didn't want to break the law began doing it when it was legalized and go to the dispensaries, but they wouldn't buy something off the black market. But for the majority of avid regular smokers, after the novelty of walking in a store and purchasing your bud wore off, the exorbitant prices they charged were just too much to bear. Because of this, the black market in a lot of these states are flourishing. After initially taking a hit, black market sales are up with people getting sick of paying those outrageous dispensary prices. And now it's a buyer's market. market. It's so completely saturated in the Bay State, buyers can choose the best quality for the lowest price. You can get the same stuff in the dispensary on the street for much cheaper. People are selling stuff out the back door, the warehouse is tax free. I've got myself a nice little hookup for where I can get anything inside the dispensary for about half the price outside the dispensary. Using legalization and cultivation laws in states like Massachusetts to their benefit, the mob is still heavily involved in this particular racket, which the government tried to steal. The big money makers nowadays are scams, white collar crimes. The government has kind of forced these guys underground. Like I said, a lot of these guys own legitimate businesses, and to find dirt on them, you kind of have to dig. But this is the future of organized crime. We've entered the automated age where everything is done online or with a smartphone. It's clear that the Mexicans control the narcotics trade and other American street organizations control the street level sales. And with the US government basically legalizing and taxing all forms of gambling, white collar identity theft scams are the mob's bread and butter. A lot of Eastern European and Middle Eastern criminals have paved the way before them, giving the mob a bit of a model to work from, stealing people's credit cards or banking info, insurance scams, false unemployment or disability claims, fake stocks, housing and apartment scams, you name it. Like I said, virtually all commerce is done electronically now, so it's become much easier to steal people's info off the web, especially older, more vulnerable people. So the simple answer is yes, the Boston mob still exists in 2024. I can guarantee that people will be in the comments saying they don't exist and that I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about. Those are mostly the same people that are extremely rude in my comments and they think that they're somebody because once a guy like Vincent Ferrara said hello to someone they were standing next to. The people who actually are somebody or were somebody are more often than not very polite and respectful. They don't need to act like tough guys on the internet. But there very much still is an entity that operates in Boston. I know this is fact and it definitely affects my video making. Naturally, guys who are still active don't want me making videos about them and bringing more attention to what they are doing. Some of the best stories that I've come upon, I've been told point blank, do not make those videos. Two particular videos that I can think of I know would be extremely successful and are really incredible stories, and no one outside those circles really knows about it, but it would bring the people a lot of problems and heat, so I've just never made them. I just say those examples to try to reinforce the point that I'm trying to make. Some people have directly told me do not talk about me. Others indirectly have had other people tell me it's time to move on with my stories. Last fall, I was in contact with a few different people, and that's why I say there's still some form of the mob left in Boston, and I personally am wary enough of them that I prefer to stay on their good side. To add to that, I'm all set with pissing off people like Mark Rossetti who've had videos requested about them. He's home free in Massachusetts currently. After that video last summer I made about the 90s conflict, I guess he wasn't particularly thrilled about his possible connection to multiple bodies that I brought up. I'm still incredibly interested to hear his side of the story, whether or not he was in fact the top echelon FBI informant and the crimes he's been accused of from the Project Marino website. If you ever wanted to talk to me, that would be awesome. But what I'm not going to do is make a video about his exploits using only newspaper articles, court, and FBI documents, which I've learned now do not tell the whole story, not even close. Apparently, from what I hear, Rossetti is working a 9-to-5 job and is disappointed with having given the majority of his life to the mob, but I've never talked to the man personally. Also, Mike Marino, aka Gigi Portala, is set to be released from prison soon. His family set up the Project Marino website in his name. Before he went away, he was an absolute force on the street and was the main opposition against Cadillac Frank's brother when Frank got locked up in '95. He's one of the few guys that stood tall and basically told the feds to F themselves. He's been locked up for over 2 decades for Cadillac Frank's near-fatal attempt in a Saugus IHOP parking lot in 1989, a crime that Marino has always claimed he didn't commit. I've always wanted to do a video on his life story like forever. I initially pissed him off too with my video last summer, but it's since been hashed out between us. By the way, thank you, Lori. I hope you're doing well. I'm really hoping he'll speak to me when he gets out. Now, Stax claims he has an exclusive rights to his story. Stax is my boy, but I've never seen anything in writing. Again, I'm not trying to screw up that opportunity by putting together a video solely done with research from articles and FBI reports. I want to speak to the actual man. It's gonna be a bit of a culture shock when he gets out. So much has changed in the past few decades. But I hope he realizes when he gets out that the government is too strong to try to go illegal. I hope he embraces YouTube or podcasts or something in that realm at least. So I'll be honest with you guys. Basically, I could give you names of people that are suspected of still being in charge and who's active and inactive in 2024. But what's the point, really? I'd just be potentially bringing heat to these guys so people sitting at home who most likely have never met the person in real life can keep score or something. It's not really something I'm interested in doing. So yes, the simple answer is the mob still exists in Boston. They just adapted their rackets and have gone much more underground. There's still enough of a factor that I don't want to upset them. Plus, I'm surrounded by their family and extended family members that live all around the Boston area. I'm not saying I'm not going to do mob content anymore. I just have a much different approach, much more careful and respectful. And in future projects that involve the mob, I want to talk to actual people instead of relying on documents alone. I began developing sources for most of my content now anyways. My channel has turned more into Boston true crime slash urban lore stuff than strictly Boston mob. I never wanted to be pigeonholed into only doing mob stuff, but that's where I was getting the views. But I've learned, and Michael Romano Sr. has reinforced, views are not everything. So the Boston mob will never be what they were in their heyday of Angulo, Bayonne, and J.R. Russo. Even as Mexican organizations pump poison into our communities that have zombies crawling all around the South End, the federal government will continue to use their resources in their crusade against the Italian LCN. That's how afraid the government is of these guys. They will never let them again return to the status that they had in the 20th century. I have a much deeper understanding of organized crime in Boston since I started this channel. I used to think I knew a lot about the Boston mob, only to realize that the majority of what I knew was just recycled lies passed down for years. To get a real understanding of the situation, you really have to dive deep into the subject matter. Not simply reading some FBI reports, court documents, and newspaper articles. Good, solid advice given me by a very wise man. I've learned from my previous experience with making videos about the Boston mob. Maybe from the outside, people weren't aware of all this and were kind of confused at why my content, as one viewer and subscriber described, took a left turn. Just as a man, and especially as a father, respect and responsibility are much more important to me than getting a couple thousand views. Thank you from the bottom of my heart to everyone that watches, subscribes, and interacts on my channel. This whole experience has really been life-changing. What started off as a hobby has turned into something really amazing, and I appreciate everyone's support. Going forward, I'm going to try to put out a quality true crime documentary style video every other Saturday and do little uploads about random Boston, Massachusetts stuff in between. Not that you guys really care, but I'm trying to come up with a more realistic schedule for someone that already has a full-time job and two small children. Thank you to all my viewers and subscribers. The most respect to Vincent Ferrara, Michael Romano Sr., love and respect to the whole Romano family, Gigi and his family, basically anyone that I've covered on videos in this channel. It's certainly been a learning experience to say the least. Thank you to the kind and patient men that have taught me. If you guys like this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Most of all, make good decisions, make good choices. Take good care of your families, your friends, your fellow human beings. Try to have a nice day, guys. I'll talk to you guys soon. God bless.